Hello everyone, this is SG DeVries, and this video is the first of two videos about building this wooden tripod and camera boom arm. The tripod itself will rotate a full 360 degrees, and it will go quite a bit higher than it is right now. I have it set at its lowest setting, and the boom arm is a parallel arm design with a counterweight. This first video will just be about building the tripod. I'm going to be building the tripod and boom arm out of ash. Now this piece of ash is 3/4 inch thick, about 12 feet long and about 8 inches wide. And if I've done my measuring correctly, I should be able to get all the parts out of this board. First thing I do is break this board down into strips of the correct width. I won't spend a whole lot of time on this process. After all, we've all seen people use a table saw before. The next thing I do is cut all these parts to the correct length. There are several small pieces that I'm cutting here, and I also need to make sure that all the leg pieces are all the exact same length, and there are several other brace parts as well that all need to be exactly the same length so that the tripod will sit level. I will be making the mounting plates and the brackets at the top of the tripod out of Baltic birch plywood. Now I don't have any 3/4 inch, so here I'm cutting some 3/8, and I'm just going to laminate it together to make a thicker piece. And these are all the pieces that we'll be using to build the tripod itself. First, we'll be working on the tripod legs. Each leg is made from 2 long beams, and then a shorter part, which is in the upper left of the photo, that is adjustable using bolts. To make sure that all my holes align, first I drill a template block here. Now I will use this template block on the first leg, and I will just drill the first hole here, and then I'll step that block down hole by hole to make sure all the holes on the first leg are spaced correctly. After that first leg is done, I can then use that first leg part to drill the other 5, so that all the legs will have the exact same hole arrangement. And once all the holes are drilled, I'm just going to do a little bit of shaping on these leg pieces. The long leg pieces I'm just rounding on the ends, and then I'll sand those smooth. And I'm also going to be using a 1/16 inch radius round over bit on all the edges. I won't show this for every part, that gets a little bit boring, but you should know that I am doing that just to take the sharp edge off of all these pieces. And after I'm done shaping all the leg pieces, I take a couple of short blocks that I cut earlier, and I glue these between the leg portions near the top end of the 3 legs. I've got bolts in the lower end just to make sure all the holes stay aligned while the glue dries here. With the 3 legs finished, it's time to move on to the top parts of the tripod. The top of the tripod will be made of 3 plates. Now the first plate here is the bearing plate, which has the legs mounted to the bottom and then some bearings in it. And the second plate you see here will be the rotation plate, which will get bolted using a lock nut to the top so that it will spin easily, but it won't wiggle. The third plate is what I call the mounting plate, which will have the boom arm bracket mounted to it. We'll do more with this plate in the next video, but I will be cutting the circle now. So the first piece to build is that bearing plate. And there are a lot of measurements that have to be done on this because of the 3 bearings and then the 3 mounting brackets that the legs attach to. After all the measurements are done, I will drill my center hole. Now this hole will be used for the bolt that attaches this to the plate above it, and it will also be used as a center of rotation hole for cutting the circle. I'm not great with using my bandsaw for cutting out circles, so I usually do a rough cut, like you see here, just a little bit off the line. And then I will use this jig that I built for my oscillating spindle sander to cut the final circle. I have a separate video about building and use of this jig if you want to check it out. Three bearing holes are then drilled into the edge of this plate, and you can see on my doweling jig that I have a spacer put in there so that when I drill the holes it's actually offset from the center, just like I want it to be. I find it easier to drill a hole for the bearing to be installed in rather than trying to make a rectangular groove to fit that bearing. Three small brackets here get built. Now these brackets will get attached to the bottom of the bearing plate and will be used to attach the legs. After those brackets are glued into place, I also use some dowel pins drilled and glued in through the top just to further secure them into place. The bearings themselves are then mounted into the holes using a wooden spacer on either side just to make sure that that bearing stays centered. With the bearing plate done, I can move on to the rotation plate that sits atop it. Now the first thing I need to do is make an indentation into the center that will hold a larger bearing here that will be used as the center of rotation. The last parts to build before we can actually assemble the tripod is the bracket that sits halfway up the legs that keep all the legs spaced equally apart. Now there are a lot of measurements that I have to do to make this bracket, so I'll just show a picture of it here and call it good. Finally, time to assemble all the pieces of the tripod. First, I will start by attaching the adjustable portion of the leg between two of the longer leg pieces. Eventually I'm going to use wing nuts here, but for now I'm just using hand-tight regular nuts. Next, I attach the small short rods that will connect to that spacer bracket. Now here I'm using lock nuts because I want this to be tight so the parts don't wiggle, but just loose enough so that it'll still rotate easily. And then I also attach the legs in the same way by using lock nuts. Again, so that they'll rotate easily, but there won't be any extra wiggle. I will probably be building a small attachment for on top of this spacer plate, just to keep the bracket from flexing downwards. I always want it to go up and not down like you see right there. And now that the legs are spaced correctly, I can finally level off the bottom of those adjustable feet. I'm going to cut 3 pieces of plastic that I have here. And I'm just going to be building some small plastic feet that I'll screw into the bottom of the legs. Just in case, I might be using this in the garage, and if it sits in something oily, I don't want to damage the wood. As you can see, this tripod is pretty strong, and I like the way the rotation works. And so next video we'll move on to the boom.